back, everybody. This is another episode of the Exodus Project. I'm your host, Steve Eisenhower. I trust all of you are doing well and having a wonderful weekend. Today I'm going to talk about a topic called Jesus' Greek hometown. So before I get started, hit that subscribe button, turn on the notifications, give me a big thumbs up, and check the description for any resource you may need. So yeah, Jesus' Greek hometown. We're going to get a little bit into the worldview, history, and background of the area that Jesus lived in at the time he lived. So I hope this kind of clears some things up. I've been getting a lot of comments that are ignorant, to say the least. Clearly people who don't know history whatsoever. So I don't mean to throw anyone under the bus or insult, but I myself do find history fascinating. I study history just about every day. So understanding history is really one of the main ways we can educate ourselves regarding like what the text says, you know. So yeah, so let's get started. Jesus' Greek hometown. So Sephorus, okay, so Sephorus, known in Hebrew as Tzipori, and in Arabic as Sephoria, since the 7th century, is an archaeological site located in central Galilee region of Israel, 6 kilometers or 3.7 miles northwest of Nazareth. So right nearby where Jesus was born and grew up. Sephorus was a city that existed already in the Hellenistic times. It was first built in the 2nd century BCE, but it was really developed by Herod's son Antipas when he went there in 4 or 3 before the Common Era, after his father's death. Sephorus is not mentioned in the New Testament, but it was one of the most majestic cities in biblical times. It even served as a temporary capital under Herod Antipas. So the gospel records lead us to believe that when Herod dies, Joseph and his family come back to Nazareth, right? But Antipas would have been, no less malevolent or no less malignant toward a quote-unquote messianic figure as his father would have been. So that we're expected to believe that they live 3 miles apart, that's nonsense. The gospel record even says that Joseph gets nervous when he finds out Antipas takes over. But anyway, excavations in the Galilee of this area found numerous Greek inscriptions, and we're going to get into a good bit of that and why. But yeah, just some background here. Sephorus was like the major. It wasn't a large city, but had a population of probably around 2,000 to 3,000 people, which at the time in rural Galilee was decently sized. Which means you would have had a lot of building going on. I know it was really built up in the time of Antipas, which means, by the time Jesus is, working age, he can go help his dad, go help Joseph work, his early teens, whatever. As a carpenter, right? Certainly he would have been to Sephorus plenty of times. I'm sure they did trade. I'm sure he sold wares there, probably did carpentry work there with all the building projects. So Jesus would have certainly been familiar with Sephorus. So it's Hellenist and Seleucid background. So the Seleucid Empire was a Greek state in Western Asia that existed during the Hellenistic period from 312 BCE to 63 BCE. The Seleucid Empire was founded by the Macedonian general Seleucus I Nicator, following the division of the Macedonian Empire, originally founded by none other than Alexander the Great. So there we have, as of 87 BCE, where the Seleucid Empire was reaching, right? So the shaded in area, there here in the picture. So the capital would have been Antioch, okay? We did a whole video on Antioch. Be sure to check that out. Up into Turkey, Tarsus. Guess who's from Tarsus? Mr. Paul. And down here we have Damascus, Syria, right? Gadara, and of course the northern part of what it shows as Judea, which would of course be the Galilee, right? So we can see that this Greek state was, and this right here, this little lake here, that's the Sea of Galilee. So this is of course after the Maccabean revolt, which I'm about to speak on here in a minute. But prior to this, this would have gone a lot lower. The Seleucid Empire was rather large at its height, so it was quite the large empire, and as we know, it was pretty successful in its expansion of the Hellenist ideal. We understand from the accounts prior to the Maccabean revolt that Hellenist culture was running rampant through all of Judea. It was really a minority of people that weren't buying into it, and that was the revolt that really saved Judaism, the Hanukkah. So the Maccabean revolt, it was a Jewish rebellion led by the Maccabees against the Seleucid Empire and against Hellenistic influence on Jewish life. The main phase of the revolt lasted from 167 to 160 BCE and ended with the Seleucids in control of Judea, but conflict between the Maccabees, Hellenized Jews, and the Seleucids continued until 134 BCE, with the Maccabees eventually attaining independence. So 50 years prior to this picture. Which means that for the majority of this time, the Seleucids were in fact, these Greek Syrians were in fact in control of the area and imposing their Hellenistic influence upon the region, and it was being eaten up. It really was. I don't have time to go into all the different ways it was going, but I'll leave with one. There were people who were actually reversing their circumcision so they could look Greek, right? A very painful, horrible process. But it just goes to show how deep the Hellenist culture got into the region. So let's move on. Mary, her parents, and the Transfiguration. So oral traditions have it that the Virgin Mary's parents actually resided in Sephorus. Apocryphal texts, which actually most of our apocryphal texts contain traditions that are still accepted by the Catholic Church. So these apocryphal texts, especially the Proto-Gospel of James, suggest that Saint Anne, who's Mary's mother, was born in Sephorus, and possibly Mary herself. Finally, it was in the nearby village of Khirbet Cana that Jesus accomplished his first miracle by changing water into wine during the wedding at Cana, mentioned in John's Gospel, which reads, "This was the beginning of the signs that Jesus accomplished. It was in Cana of Galilee. He manifested his glory, and his disciples believed in him." So as you can see on the photo there, Sephorus is red with the star. Now, if Nazareth is only 3 miles away, right? Cana's, probably only about 4 miles away in the opposite direction. They're both very close. Mount Tabor. Tradition states that is where Jesus manifested his glory to disciples. The Transfiguration, right down here, which is not far from Sephorus. So that's probably only about, it's not much farther, probably only about 7-8 miles away from Sephorus. So all these things are happening in the same area, people. Magdala, that's where Mary Magdalene's from, right on the Sea of Galilee. Capernaum, that's where Jesus' home base was. So all these things are occurring, all in the same place, all in this Hellenist region, rather a bit farther from Jerusalem, right? So they don't necessarily have the central hub of Jewish culture here, especially when we see that this region was accepting Hellenist culture very, very much. So let's move on. So it's a Greek city in every way. Excavations at Sephorus, located less than 4 miles from Nazareth, took pride of place in discussions of the region, at least within New Testament scholarship. A theater had been uncovered there in 1931, and more recently bathhouses, a basilical building, and an aqueduct have been excavated. At least some of the city's streets were shown to be organized in a grid pattern, a characteristic feature of both Greek and Roman cities. And there I have a picture linked. You can see the grid style of how the city was laid out. Move on. Here's two other grid plans of Greek cities, and you can see they are basically exactly the same. You have your center crossroad here, and these are the blocks of the house. This is Miletos in Turkey and Priene in Turkey. Turkey, of course, Anatolia was also part of the Seleucid Empire, and that is when these cities would have been built as well. Directly under Greek supervision with Greek culture and Greek plan. And as you can see, there's a small little key here. You have the agora, 2, of course, the amphitheater, and 3 was the stadium. So you take a look at that Sephorus in Galilee, looks exactly the same. Clearly built with a Greek worldview, Greek plans, Greek understanding of architecture. It's anything but Jewish. So let's move on. So the Dionysus mosaic found in a home in Sephorus, and these are all over the place, people. The city's spectacular mosaics contained Dionysiac imagery, including a depiction of a procession in honor of Dionysus, as well as a symposium with Heracles. So here we can see that procession. You see Dionysus here. Dionysus here, pouring wine, right? So clearly, if you're taking all the time to make these, exquisite mosaics depicting Greek culture, Greek myth, Greek gods, this is a Jewish city. This is a city in Judea, people. Mary and her mother are born here, right? 2nd century BCE. What's the worldview they're coming up in? What's the worldview that they're living in? If this is any indication, it's anything but Jewish. Hellenist Jewish at most, right? You have people like Philo who were very entranced by the Jewish or the Greek philosophy. They had a Greek worldview that they melded with Judaism to make this Hellenist Judaism, right? And Philo is credited as being one of the main fathers of Christian theology. So what worldview are we seeing here, people? Take a look at the pictures. Take a look at the slides. Dionysus and Jesus. So these are some excerpts from ancient writings that actually talk about stories of the Dionysus myth. So on the Aegean islands of Naxos, wine gushed forth from a spring, a miracle that first occurred when Dionysus married Adriana there. That's cited from Otto, page 8. And this, remember people, we just spoke about the wedding in Cana. Jesus is at a wedding. He turns water into wine, right? Dionysus is all over the place in Sephorus. Mary's in Sephorus. Cana's just right 3-4 miles away. Is it all starting to come together? At Elis in the western Peloponnesus, on the occasion of Dionysus' holiday called Theria, which means to rage, when Dionysus was thought to be present there, priests under the watch of witnesses placed 3 empty basins in a building under seal. The next morning, when the seal on the door was broken and people entered, the basins were full of wine. Cited from Pausanias. I do believe it was 6 large jugs of water that Jesus turned into wine. It seems very similar. And we understand that the Dionysus myth goes back as far as the Mycenaeans. That's really early. That's pre-Trojan War. So we have Dionysus myth ingrained into Greek culture for, already close to 2,000 years before this point. So what's the worldview, people? Right? What's the mythos? Plutarch relates a story in which a spring near Thebes smelled like wine when the infant Dionysus was bathed in it. And that's cited from Lysander. In Euripides' Bacchae was the Thracian version of Dionysus. I do believe Rome adopted that same name, as well as Liber, I think. So a Maenad struck the ground with her thyrsus, and the god at the spot put forth a fountain of wine. Importantly, most of these miracles were associated with the epiphany of Dionysus at the time of his festival, evidencing the presence of his divinity. Likewise, the Cana miracle was depicted as a sign of Jesus' divine identity. Wow. Is it coming together? I'm not saying that Jesus is an exact carbon copy of anybody. But what I am saying is that pieces of Jesus' stories and his persona were borrowed from mythos and mythologies all across the region that would have resonated with the people that were being spoken to. After all, the Gospels are in Greek, people. Written in the Galilee, which was ensconced with Greek culture, as we've just gone over. So don't come at me saying Jesus isn't just, I'm not a mythicist, I'm not just saying Jesus was a carbon copy, I'm more of a historicist. But it's just very clear that he's a composite. Sure, there may have been a historical Jesus that did none of these things. Who cares? That's not the point. The one we have on paper is a composite of all these different mythical personalities. Dionysus' festival was celebrated in the spring. Jesus' resurrection is celebrated in the spring. In one myth, Dionysus is torn to pieces by the Titans, but born again every 3 years. And he's restored in a new body. Jesus was, according to Paul, resurrected in a spiritual body 3 days later. See what I mean, people? They're mashing this with Jonah. Saying Jonah was in the belly of the whale, so must Jesus be in the belly of the earth. Right? Dionysus, 3 years. It's all coming together. New body. So there's also an Orpheus mosaic there. Another mosaic showed flora and fauna of the Nile. And yet another portrayed Orpheus. Where was a major hub of Hellenistic Judaism was actually in Alexandria, Egypt. So it would make sense that, this exchange of idea is that the Nile is going to make a major splash and show up in the imagery of the city. So Orpheus in Greek mythology was a Thracian bard. A bard is like a minstrel, a legendary musician and a prophet. He was also a renowned poet, and according to the legend, traveled with Jason and the Argonauts in search of the Golden Fleece, and even descended into the underworld of Hades to recover his lost wife Eurydice. Orpheus in Christianity. In the 4th century, there's catacombs of Saints Peter and Marcellinus, which is in Rome, which is where this mosaic here on the right is found. And as in usual classical iconography, Orpheus is pictured holding a harp and a plectrum and wearing a Phrygian cap. So he is a figure from pagan lore, but the catacombs this image is painted on are Christian, as are all its other images. He appears to have been chosen because he went into the underworld to save his wife, just as Jesus did to save all the faithful who constitute his wife, the church. Other Paleo-Christian images also overlay Orpheus iconography onto that of Christ as Good Shepherd. Is it starting to make sense? Like I just said, composite figure. So much so that this Greek worldview, this is 4th century, in the 300s in Rome, and literal pictures of Greek gods who did the same things as Jesus in the Jesus myths are being portrayed on the walls. Come on, people. The coinage from the era. So not only these mosaics bore Greek inscriptions, but also did the city's coins, the market weight, and other objects. So the top photo, that's a coin which was struck at Sephorus during the reign of Herod Antipas in the year 1 BCE. You can see the Greek on there. Clearly, if you got Greek on your coinage, the bottom photo, that's a coin struck at Sephorus during the time of Agrippa under Nero. And this would be, after Jesus is dead for about 30 years, right before the temple's destroyed. And you still have Greek on the coinage. So it's pretty clear, people, that Greek was the basic common ideology, worldview, language of trade, right, in the area. So it just goes to show that the worldview is anything but Torah Judaism. Greek daily life. The ancient Greeks built open-air theaters where the public could watch the performances of Greek comedy, tragedy, and satyr plays. They then exported the idea to their colonies throughout the Aegean, so that the theaters became a typical feature of the urban landscape in all Greek cities. The Romans continued and expanded the concept, added a monumental backstage, and generally made the structures more grandiose. The large semicircular structures, still with their excellent acoustics, are available today at many archaeological sites, and several of them remain in use not only for modern concerts and performances, but also for festivals of ancient Greek dramas. And there in the photo is the amphitheater that was uncovered at Sephorus. It is a Greek city in every way, so much so that it has the Greek worldview of stage play, right? That's a totally Greek invention, totally Greek idea. I do believe the word hypocrite actually means a stage actor, someone who wears multiple faces. So come on, Jesus was 3 miles from here. Probably worked here, probably helped build that. Might have helped build, if he's a carpenter, what we don't know about what happened from, we have one instance when he was 12 when he ended up in the temple. Okay, so that means from his birth until the age of 33, we really have nothing. Nothing of what he was doing. Who's to say him, James, and his father weren't here working on things, building things, exposed to Greek culture, trading in Greek coins, looking at Greek images on the walls? Is it starting to make sense? The people that were believing he was the Messiah, the people who wrote about him, living in areas like this, seeing plays with scripts, with dramas, mixing characters. Come on, people. Bet She'arim. So Bet She'arim was founded at the end of the 1st century BCE during the reign of King Herod. The necropolis, which in Greek means city of the dead, at Bet She'arim had been investigated in 1936 through 1940 and also 1953 through 1958. But the full report had not been translated from Hebrew into English until the 70s. With nearly 300 inscriptions, the catacomb complex was increasingly cited as an exemplar of the region's Hellenistic milieu. A Greek inscribed necropolis, city of the dead, which is really, it's like a large city of catacombs where people are buried. As we know from other tombs, your standard Jewish tomb of the time was a single, it held one family. Don't have to go too much into that, but this is a necropolis. This is a city of the dead. This is a Greek, a large Greek catacomb for when people are buried. And it's cited to be one of the most exemplary pieces of Greek architecture in the region. Galilee. But also Tiberias was considered an extremely Greek city. So though the presence of the modern city by the same name made it difficult to excavate, on the basis of several categories of evidence, be it architecture, coins, various forms of art, inscriptions, Greek and Latin loanwords, and names in Jewish sources, The presence of imports from elsewhere in the Mediterranean, the lower Galilee especially, was increasingly seen as no less Hellenized and urbanized than anywhere else in the Roman world. You hear that? The Galilee was no less Hellenized than anywhere else in the Roman world. I'm going to go back up a couple slides. And there's Tiberias, right along the Sea of Galilee. Not too far away. It's all going on in the same area, people. But I hope that helps everyone. I hope that kind of shows what the worldview of the time, what the worldview of the region, what the worldview of the people writing. They were writing in Greek. I hope it makes some things clear. You know, Sephorus was the Greek city in the region, established by King Antipas. Really built up by King Antipas himself. It existed, you know, a few hundred years earlier, during the time of the Seleucid Empire, which was a Greek state. But Herod Antipas really built it up and made it what it was. Because he was completely invested. You know, they were puppet kings. They were completely invested in Greco-Roman thought, you know, Greco-Roman ideologies. So I hope that helps. Hope that sheds some light on what really the socio like the socio political landscape of the Galilee at the time would have looked like, what the people would have been exposed to, what the people would have been really ensconced by, right? Everyone always says that the Galileans were ignorant fishermen, illiterate, unlearned. Now, if that's the case and they don't know any better, what are they learning? Are they learning the Greek worldview that's all around them? Or are they truly learning Judaism? Right? There's even been found, you know, Hellenist Jewish synagogues there with Greco-Roman mythological personalities painted on the walls, etc. So it's clear that Hellenized Judaism was running rampant at the time. You have Philo, who is really the progenitor of the Logos literature, which John completely espouses. So, yeah, everyone, it's just not so clear, and when we really look at history and start to see what was going on in the region, in the city, 3 miles from Jesus' home, it's just very, very clear the worldview was not Jewish, and if it was Jewish, it was a very Hellenized version of it, just completely ensconced, completely, you know, surrounded by Greek life, Greek culture, and as we know from the Hanukkah story just a few hundred years prior, Greek culture was very very successful in Judea at the time. They were very open to receive it until the Maccabean revolt occurred, you know, and really saved Judaism. You know, so of course there's going to be some carryover there, and of course there's going to be, as we can see, cities that still were very, very much Hellenized and espousing that Greek worldview and that Greek culture. But okay, everyone, I hope that helped. So until next time, this was the Exodus Project. I'm Steve Eisenhower, and we'll see you next time.